Sorry, in that case, we have about 5 people in person, 7 on Zoom, so solid showing. Today's workshop is going to be on EDR and KQL. I'll get into what exactly that means, but both of these are really useful to understand in the cybersecurity space, whether you're working in a role that directly uses them or not, because a lot of the investigative principles we're going to go over really cross over into a lot of areas, especially on the blue team side of the house. So real quick, what we're just going to talk about is what is EDR and why is it so important? Then we're just going to talk about a little bit of the EDR products that exist out there that organizations use, differences between EDR and XDR, because you will probably hear both used a lot of times interchangeably, and how you could utilize EDR for investigative purposes, for incident response purposes, so on and so forth, and kind of one of the examples of a way which we can communicate with EDR, which is Kusto query language or KQL, which if any of you have used SQL or other query language before, it'll look pretty similar. Most of them kind of are that way, and they're pretty self-explanatory. And then we'll dive into a demo where we'll use KQL in a real incident response engagement. So starting with EDR, it's kind of difficult to differentiate it from other defensive tools because in reality it is a lot more of a marketing term than anything else. But it is kind of the primary tool that organizations will use for defensive purposes. It stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. And the way you can think of it is a security camera system on every endpoint being any machine on the network. And it detects anything, but it can also respond and have other capabilities to handle any sort of unusual activity. It has behavioral analysis, so it's not just looking for hashes or specific file names or processes like a lot of antivirus do. Another reason why EDR is a lot more powerful than traditional antivirus is because it's usually a lot lighter. Most organizations, when they purchase an EDR, what they do is they install a little sensor on the machine. Now, it's not a physical sensor, it's usually referred to as one, but that sensor usually, in the case of most EDRs, runs with the kernel permissions, and instead of having the entire EDR on it, it just communicates to whether it's CrowdStrike's EDR or Microsoft's EDR or Palo Alto's, it just communicates to those servers, which it takes a lot of the burden off of the user, which traditional antivirus, they tend to be very slow. They're really just bloatware because you have to run the entire thing locally. And a lot of times, depending on what kind of EDR you use, the company will also provide you with a direct incident response team, with threat intelligence reports, and a lot of other features that kind of help you build out your security architecture, especially if you're a smaller organization. These kind of do 50 to 60% of the heavy work. And a lot of times, like traditional antivirus, if they see anything that they can nuke, like a file, they'll do it and they'll get rid of it. And the one EDR that we're going to primarily focus on today and how we're going to communicate with it is Microsoft Defender. But yeah, in terms of other EDR that are worth noting, and XDR, and I'll explain the difference in a second. It's more minutia than importance, but there's Carbon Black, which is owned by VMware, which you'll know if you've used Workstation Player from VMware. Cortex is Palo Alto's XDR. Sentinel-1, Sophos, Symantec, the guys who do Norton, they have EDR. Microsoft Defender, that's the Shield. Rapid7 is also a popular budget option, and the one that most people know from it causing a massive outage in summer was CrowdStrike EDR. And to kind of explain a little bit what EDR versus XDR is extended detection and response, so it expands beyond just having it look at the endpoints, and it completes a security picture. It can integrate cloud workloads, email systems, which are oftentimes not run by you. They're usually run by Microsoft if you're using Microsoft Office, or if you're using Google Suite, they're run by Google, so on and so forth. Identity access systems, so you can integrate something like Okta or Duo. XDR just kind of takes what EDR does and spreads it out through pretty much every asset in an organization that would pertain to security. And yeah, the example I have is if you could think of EDR as having security cameras, XDR is having complete security system that monitors everything. Now, in practice, when you are working in a security role, the differentiation isn't as important. All you really need to kind of understand is that XDR reaches more devices than just traditional endpoints, but functions the same way in that it looks for anomalous behavior, it looks for any sort of activity that is threats, and it lets you interact and query with it and aggregate those logs. And this is just kind of a diagram example of Palo Alto's XDR, which is Cortex. So it takes log data from the cloud, from the endpoints, and from the network itself, and it kind of looks through and sifts them based on rules that you can define, based on rules Palo Alto defines, and more commonly these days, they will use machine learning algorithms to detect any sort of anomalous behavior that could be perceived as malicious. And one use case, because we're using the terminology, like, well, why would we use EDR? Why would we use XDR? And how we can do that is we have this little guy over here who's thinking. He's like, I got an alert about a suspicious file. My Microsoft Defender flagged it, and I want to see if any of my other users downloaded. Microsoft Defender flagged that harsh download a suspicious file. I want to see how did any of my other users also download that file or anything else. So we're going to go into how we can do that, and it's actually through something that most people here have probably at least used somewhat nominally, and that's query languages. So show of hands, I know we have more people on Zoom today, but who here has either heard of or used SQL? Okay, so pretty much everyone in the room. It's the most widely used query language to communicate with databases. GraphQL is also very popular, specifically for API uses, but also in security context, we'll have our own query languages. And a lot of times they function in similar manners. There really are more the query languages out there than there actually needs to be, but it's probably a mix of marketing and business reasons as to why that's the case. Some popular ones that are in the security landscape, KQL, like we mentioned, we'll use. So that's Kusto query language, is made by Microsoft. There's Elasticsearch query language, which you'll use if you ever use Elk Stack. And then there's Splunk search processing language, which is pretty much the way you would communicate with Splunk's SIEM. But specifically, Kusto query language, it's used in a lot of Microsoft products, specifically with Azure services like Data Explorer, Azure Monitor, and Microsoft Sentinel. Microsoft Sentinel is just Microsoft SIEM, so that's a tool that aggregates events and allows you to look through them. And similar to SQL, it's for these really large data sets and time series data. When we think about cybersecurity, we're ingesting the endpoint of every little activity that goes on in a network. So if you think about Rutgers and RE Wireless, think about how many students, do all kinds of stuff on that network, and everything has to get logged. There has to be a lot of data storage available for it, and it has to be very time sensitive in the sense that you really need to be able to sift through it if you're investigating an incident. This is honestly what can make cybersecurity expensive for a lot of organizations, is because the sheer amount of data that they might need to pipeline to something like an EDR or a SIEM it gets really, really expensive. And it's just kind of an example of a sample KQL query. So it's pretty easy to read if you just break it down. So it's using a table called storm events. So that's going to have a bunch of data regarding storm events, and it's looking for the state of Texas and event type flood. It's going to sort that by damage property, and what you're going to see, this is not project, but project. What you're going to see is the start time, the end time, the state, event type, damage property. And that's what's going to be returned to you based on floods in Texas. So once you kind of get the hang of it, it's relatively simple, and especially like if you use SQL, this looks really, really easy to you. And that's just kind of the nature of it. But there's a really high skill ceiling, and we'll get into why that is the case and show an example afterwards. But without further ado, I know we wanted to make workshops this semester a lot more interactive. I'm going to give a minute in case anyone hasn't created an account yet on KC7 Cyber to do that, and then we'll jump into the demo. Take this to chat for any questions. Does anyone here have any questions so far? No SQL yet. Take 39 before leaving MCC. Yeah, I mean, the thing with SQL is my first internship was a data analyst role where I had to use SQL, and I never took a SQL class, but I was able to really grind down and learn it in 2 weeks, just because it's really simple to understand, and you'll see once we start doing this demo that it's not that on the surface complicated of a language, and not that complicated to get a lot of value out of. But there's a really high skill ceiling into how you could really optimize it. So that's what makes query languages fun in that regard. I'll just give it 1 minute before we get started, just because I want to let other people create an account if they haven't yet. Parse, do you know if 239 transfers? Because I know some people got screwed over by that.
I'm not sure if it transfers, but I know that it's one of the better SQL classes.
It's because Pachoki was insane.
Yeah.
That guy's actually nuts. That guy is.
I guess anal about everything, but learned so much from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, so update, we have 9 people in the Zoom right now, so plus the 6 here, we have about 15. Cool. Does anyone want any more time to set up an account before I get started? Okay, cool. So when you create an account on KC7 Cyber, you can go to the case vault, which if you create an account, this should be the first page you see, but if not, just go to the left and click modules where it says start here. And this will give you all the kind of investigations that you could go through and practice KQL. Now, the first one that says a rat beef start here, I think this is way too easy for all of you. So we're just going to go to a scandal and Valdoria, and we're going to go through a few of the questions. Hopefully we can get through maybe 10 or 12. And it'll start pretty easy, and it'll get like a little bit more tricky as we go up, but kind of let you guys take the wheel and then come up with queries that we can do. So if you click on this, play now, it should take you to, and if anyone's noticed, I'm not using my actual KC7 cyber account just because I already completed this one. I created a new account with the name GlobeMan44. If anyone was here last semester when I visited Canadian drug markets on the dark web, this was my alter ego that I used. So GlobeMan44 has turned a new leaf. He no longer wants to purchase amphetamines, but wants to learn KQL. But if you click play, it should take you to a left sidebar with the kind of story, and then on the right you have your query editor. So let me give that a second in case anyone has any questions about getting here.
What module did you click on?
Scandal in Valdoria.
Okay.
Does anyone want me to show that one more time? So cool. The cool thing about KC7 Cyber is it's run by a lot of really talented people that work it's a complete nonprofit. It's run by a lot of the guys at Microsoft's Ghost team, which is their threat research team, and they kind of put together these little like storylines, and you get to kind of play the role of an incident responder, because a lot of times what people don't realize when it comes to the cybersecurity workforce, companies that don't have their own incident response team, what they'll do is they'll contract incident responders to fly out to investigate their incident and kind of try to like get to the bottom of things. So the premise of this one is on the eve of the election, Nene Leaks, the esteemed editor of the Valdorian Times, so it's a newspaper, I suppose, awoke to a nightmare. The Valdorian Times, the beacon of truth for the city, published a scandalous article accusing Luffy of corruption and misconduct. You could tell this was written by Microsoft people because it's not very well written. The article, a vile concoction of lies, was not what she had approved. The article alleged that Luffy, hailed for his environmental activism and social reforms, was secretly involved in a land deal scandal, exploiting his position to benefit a shadow network of real estate moguls. Furthermore, it accused Luffy of accepting substantial bribes to push environmentally damaging policies, a stark contradiction to his public persona. However, the article, a vile concoction of lies, was not what had been approved by the newspaper's editor. The Valdorian Times hired you as a cyber incident responder to help investigate the incident and get to the bottom of how this falsified article was published. So we're likely looking for an insider threat here to figure out, who published this. So this one just kind of to acknowledge the storyline. You just type in ready, and that gives you the first question, and then the next question is going to give us a little bit of overview over the database that we're kind of working with. So one thing to know, especially with KQL, is it's a database with multiple tables. So before we really get cracking, one thing that's worth doing is this command called show tables, where if you run this, it'll tell you all the kinds of tables we're working with here. So we have a passive DNS table, which allows us to see IP to domain correlations, and as they change, we have an employees table, which gives us information about the employees, both outbound and inbound network traffic. So outbound traffic being what the Valdorian Times employees are, exposing out to the internet, and inbound traffic being what comes back, or what just comes into the network as a whole. File creation events, you can probably think of why some of these would be useful in a cyber investigations context. Email records, authentication events, inbound, I already mentioned the inbound network events, process events, so processes that run, and security alerts. So when the EDR sends out a security alert, that will be stored in that table. So we can kind of chain things together to really get to the bottom of what's happening here. And the first query that we're asking to be ran, and also one thing worth noting with KQL, like other query languages, it runs where your cursor is located. So you don't have to actually delete anything. It's interpreted in that regard. So you can just keep all your queries together. You can clear it. It's up to you what's your preference. But the first query we're running is we're taking the employees table and we're piping to take 10 because we want to just kind of get an idea of what the employees table looks like. And we probably don't need to load all the employees. What take 10 allows us to do is it just loads the first 10 employees. So we run that. You could either press the run command or there's a shortcut where you press shift enter. I like to do that because it makes me feel cool. And it gives us the top 10 records of employees. So we can kind of get some information here. We get their hire date. We get the name. We get the user agent. So this is the browser they use, the operating system, WoW64 means that I believe it's a subsystem, a Windows 32-bit subsystem in Windows 64, the IP address and their email address, the company's domain. So here it's all the same. It's ValdorianTimes.news. Why is my scroll broken? Oh, hello. Okay, there we go. The username, which I don't know why this isn't moving with it, the role that they have, and the host name. So if you can kind of like think ahead, the host name, that's going to be something that's really important. And especially when we're investigating various incidents, where they come from, as well as the IP address, so on and so forth. Now, for this one, again, it just kind of gave us the query. We don't really have to find any information. We're just looking around. Press done. All right, this next one. Now we're going to actually start to try to figure out some stuff. So now that we have access to the data, we'll need to get a lay of the land. Let's get some more information about the Valdorian Times. For each query you provide, you can simply click the copy and paste button. You could query it and run it from there. Personally, and this is kind of something that you'll hear a lot, especially like when you learn any sort of language, I personally like to just write it out because I feel like it gets better muscle memory. So we still are looking for the employees table, and this time, instead of piping it to take 10, we're just going to run a count so we know how many total there are, and it's just going to return that to us. So that being 100, we can move on to the next one. We can check Zoom in case we have any questions. Okay, nothing so far. Now, because we're looking at a issue where something got published without being properly approved, we might want to look at who the director of editing is, so the editorial director. So again, this one we can just take from here. And again, you can keep your previous queries. It's up to you. Sometimes it does help to keep the previous queries in case you want to use the results of one query to refine a previous one. So what this question is particularly letting you know is kind of the format. So from here, you would pick the table. The where kind of allows you to specify a field. So for here, the field from the table is role. The operator is equal. So we're looking for where role equals editorial director. So we can try to figure out the name of this editorial director. Does anyone want to tell me what the editorial director's name is? Whether in the Zoom or in person. Yeah.
Many leaks.
NA-Leaks, yep. And Rich got it too. Yep. So run that, we get NA-Leaks. We could just copy and paste from here. Boom. Cool. Simple enough. So our next step is we want to kind of see what's going on with NA-Leaks. So we want to figure out what are we doing here? We're trying to learn more about her. How many emails did she receive? So now we're going to move to the emails table, and we have to, and this is a case of where it's useful to keep previous queries because we have this open, but if we didn't and we were like, oh, what's Nana's email? We could just run this query again and we would have her email. So what we can do here is we can take this query. Again, this is pulling from the email table. So now we're at a different table of the database. We're using the same structure where we have the operator, the field, which is the recipient, and what it equals. Now, obviously, we can't run this. We have to put NanaLeaks' email, which we have here, right, from our previous query. So we can take that. We just slot it in. And what we're looking for is how many emails did she receive. So, and again, this is important why we have recipient and not just all the emails together. So does anyone want to tell me how many emails she received?
18.
18? Cool. And also, like, if we wanted to look specifically at those emails, we can just get rid of count. We have all her emails, and we have the ability to look through other components of them. So whether it was allowed through the filter or not. Last week we had a phishing workshop, so this is kind of related to that. A lot of times we put these controls in place to block potential phishing emails, so stuff will get blocked, and that can be an indication of a malicious actor if there's a lot of blocked or flagged suspicious stuff. But this next one, how many distinct senders were seen in the email logs from the domain weprintyourstuff.com? So we want to create this query. Where sender has we print your stuff.com, and we want a distinct. So I believe this would be sender, right? Okay, and that gets us 100. So what distinct allows us to do is it basically it's kind of self-explanatory. It's unique items. So if we were to get rid of distinct, we would have a few duplicates, and that would maybe there are just no duplicates here. But in a case where there were duplicates, those would be visible at that point. Now we have a lot of interesting names here. So how many distinct websites did Lois Lane visit? Does anyone want to give this one a try? Whether here or in the Zoom. Remember, we're looking for a volume of something that is distinct. So if we look back to our previous example, that should give you a little bit of a hint. But first we need to I just realized we need to figure out what Lois Lane's IP is. So we know her name is Lois Lane. What we can do is we can go back to the employees table where, and the good thing about KQL and just Microsoft Defender as a whole is it fills a lot of stuff for you, so you don't really have to guess. So we're looking for employees where name equals Lois Lane. And then from there, we get her IP as 10.10.0.222. Nope. And we can plug that in here, and I will let someone else figure out the rest and get me the how many distinct websites that she visited while I plug in my laptop because the battery's dying. Oh. Oh, outlet here? What the fuck? Oh, there it is. Wait, that's not an outlet. Oh my god. Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. All right, we should be okay now. Let me check the Zoom, see if anyone has that answer. 62. Did you also get 62? Okay. Yeah, 62. So the way we get that, we have the IP. We're looking for distinct, and well, let me autofill the. Yeah, okay. So distinct URL, I'm assuming you did, right? Yeah, so distinct URL, and then the last operator here is count. Is there an alternative? That's a good question. So maybe not in this case, but if there's maybe like a destination IP field, maybe you could get an alternative way to do this. But yes, yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like not all the tables have the same field, so that's why you have to kind of query them in different ways. So what was it? You said 62? Cool. And I saw Harris got that as well. Cool. We're making pretty good progress on this. So we might be able to get some of the harder ones, which are pretty fun. So how many distinct domain names in the passive DNS records contain the word hire? So does anyone want to maybe take a guess as to why we're looking for records with the word hire in them? Let me see if anyone wants to maybe take a guess at that. Because as we investigate, it's important to also take into note the kind of technical components that we're looking for, but also we have a hypothesis. We're dealing with a specific scenario. Well, why would we be looking for a domain that has the word hire in it? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. That might be exactly it. I don't remember the exact storyline, but that makes a lot of sense. So here we're gonna fill out some stuff. So what are we looking for here? Passive DNS records that contain the word hire. So what are our options here with passive DNS records? That's not going to show me. Okay, so which field do we maybe want here with a passive DNS record that we're looking for domains with the word hire? It's kind of obvious a little bit, but it would just be domain. So contains, because we're not looking for, if we did equals hire, then I would just like do domains that it's literally just says hire, which there probably are none because domains have certain formats. So we're looking for contains here, which allows us to specifically look for certain strings within that. So contains higher. You said 7? 6? Okay, so from there, I'm assuming you did distinct domain and operator. Count 6. Okay, cool. Now, what if we didn't do distinct? How many domains would we see that contained the word higher? 9. Okay. So again, this is important where like you could kind of see in a very, very like small example why having like more thorough query language skills helps, because it sifts your amount of domains that you would have to go down by a third. Now, 3 domains isn't a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, using and being mindful of duplicates can make a big difference. Cool. And we leveled up. And let me see if there's anything in the Zoom. Can you explain the reason why 62 appears? Okay, yeah, sure. Sorry about that. Which one was that? That was this one. Okay, so we're looking for websites that she visited that were distinct. Do I still have this query? Okay, so we have outbound network events. So we're trying to see where her IP reached out to the internet, and we wanted to see specifically distinct URLs, right? Because when she's reaching out to a website, that website has a URL. And if we query that, it gives us 62 instances of that. Now, if we didn't do distinct URLs, it would still be 62, but if maybe it helps to see that exact table. So let me just get rid of count until you can see what we're looking at here. So alternatively, you could also just query it just to see what URL she was visiting, and then it tells you the records, and that also suffices for the answer. But what we're looking at here, just to reiterate again, is we're looking at Lois Lane's IP and where she's visiting distinct URLs. So these are all the URLs that she visited. Does that make sense? And just totals to 62. Yeah, exactly. The database shows that she has visited 62 websites. Yep. And the way we search that is just by searching how many times her IP distinctly from an outbound network event connected to a distinct URL. Does that make sense? What the heck happened? I think okay, we're back. You still hear me? David got pwned. I did. Can you guys see everything okay? Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry about that. That was weird. Kirit was trying to hack me again. Okay, cool. So where were we? So we're looking at domains that contain the word higher. So that was a 9. And we wanted also to make sure that we had a distinct domain. Oh, type it. All right, that's where we left off. And now we're looking for IP. What IPs did the domain job hire resolve to? So we're going to go back to the passive DNS records. And again, to iterate, what that means is it's just are the records that we have of which IPs resolve to which domains and which domains resolve to which IPs. So what would we want the name of the domain to be here? Job hire. Just job hire? Jobhire.org. Thank you, Charles. And what do we want distinct here? IP. We can do that. And also, honestly, what helps me understand queries a lot of the time when we're reading them is kind of working backwards from them, because it feels more readable that way. So we're looking for a distinct IP where the domain is jobhire.com from the passive DNS records. In my opinion, that helps to read it sometimes. So yeah, this is the distinct IP. So this is the IP that jobhire.org resolves to at the time of these logs. Cool. We're almost at the fun questions. So this is a little bit more of so if anyone is familiar with programming principles, when you create a variable, you could do a very similar thing with query languages, and KQL is no different, where we can create a variable here called Mary IPs, where that variable will always equal this specific query. And what we can do is we can later on use that. So the next time we need to use that specifically in a query, we don't have to write it out again. We can just use the variable name. So we're looking for distinct websites. Did the employee with the first name Mary visit? So first we're querying two tables with this specific example. So I'm gonna just, for the first second, just split this up. Oh, never mind. Split this up so you can kind of see. We're making this variable equal the queries of two tables, which are employees and outbound network events. Let me see if there's questions. Okay, cool. So does anyone want to maybe employee name? That one's a little obvious. I'm not gonna ask for that. But does anybody want to tell me how we would actually go about getting the source IP here? Oh wait, no, never mind. Wait, hold on. Did this actually do it for us? Oh, I forgot the pipe. Okay, that already is set for us. So that would equal 58. Is there a way to include comments, take notes in KQL? I believe so. I think it's here, it's a classic test. Is it? Yeah, you could just use dashes. I think you could also do one of these. Hold on. You could comment stuff out. Yeah.
Are you setting a variable?
Yeah, so you're setting a variable that works a query between two tables here. And if we get rid of count, just to see what exactly we're looking at here. Yeah, we're looking specifically distinct websites Mary visited, and the way we're doing that is instead of the previous example where we had to go into Lois Lane's employee name, fetch the IP, what we can just do is we can just grab Mary's IP from this query and then port it through for the outbound network events, if that makes sense. So we just kind of like skip a step as opposed to having to query through multiple tables. See if there's any questions, because I know this one is can be a little confusing. What is a semicolon? It's just a syntax thing. I don't know why specifically it's here. I think this is because you're trying to indicate that you are like done with this specific part of the query, but the entire query isn't over. So like to go to the next line. At least that's what I think it is. I think it's just something syntactically here. Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it, Charles. I don't know if you guys heard it said to indicate that it's a new table you're looking at. Does that make sense? They can if you like join them, right? Yeah. So okay. Here, let me split this up. So we're getting the variable Mary's IPs. Now, what Mary's IPs is it's the query from the employees table where the name has Mary and you're getting a distinct IP. So that's what that variable creates. Then we go to outbound network events where source IP in Mary's IP, and Mary's IP is the IP we got from Mary through this query. Does that make a little sense? Oh,
just take 10 from outbound. Show what it is.
What do you mean take 10?
See like data, right? Want to know what
Oh, so
yeah, just take 10 from outbound. Just to show them like how traffic goes.
oh, okay. Let me put this together. Oh, wait. So Mary's IP, as her source IP is 10.10.0.50. And what we're basically doing here is we're creating this first query that allows us to pull that without having to go into the employees table first to find it out. Because the alternative to this is we can go to employees where name contains Mary, because we're looking at first names. Right, and then we're like, we see, okay, Mary has this IP. And then we can grab that IP, copy and paste, and then do outbound network events where source IP equals. But what we're able to do with combining these two is that we kind of just skip that step. So it makes it a little faster. Does that explain a little bit?
Yeah.
Cool. So we have something in the chat. So then we can add distinct URL and count. Yeah, you can modify these in any way you want. This is looking for how many distinct websites Mary visited. So then, yeah, we would do distinct. Well,
I just did count.
you just did count.
Yeah.
I mean, that probably works here because probably has only visited like distinct websites. But in case she was visiting duplicates, you could do the same and just like distinct. Oh, what did I do wrong here?
You're
Oh, I forgot the same answer. But in case she didn't visit, she visited the same website multiple times, you would want to maybe do this to have an idea of how many distinct ones there are. Cool. We're progressing along. So this next question, how many authentication attempts did we see accounts of employees with the first name Mary do? So the variable we created, we can create a new name here for a new variable. So we're doing something similar where we're creating a variable based on an initial query, so then we could later use it for a second query. Yeah, Mike, the recording will be posted in Discord. Luckily, this time I'm recording during my Security Plus workshop on Monday. I forgot to record that. So, but yeah, honestly, the great thing about like KQL is that you can just use like KC7 Cyber has like so many of these out there that you could really like hone your skills, and it is very transferable to other disciplines within the blue team environment. Just because a lot of times when you're using forensic tools, you're querying something. A lot of times when you're a SOC analyst and you're looking at events, you're querying something. You may not be using KQL, you may not be using Microsoft Defender, but a lot of the principles that you think about when you investigate are going to cross over, and the query languages are pretty easy to learn from one another. We'll do two more, and then I have like two more slides that I want to talk about before we wrap up. We're doing pretty good on time here. Yeah.
So as you're working on these challenges,
Mhm.
if you're doing this by yourself and you get stuck somewhere, is there like a write-up YouTube channel or something?
So that's a good question. I don't know if there's a write-up YouTube channel. They have a Discord though, and the Discord is very active, and there might be write-ups out there for a lot of the easier and medium challenges. And there's also like a big community on Reddit when it comes to query languages. Like one example is if for CrowdStrike specific Falcon query language or whatever we call it, right? I don't remember what the name is for Falcon. They used to have something where on the CrowdStrike subreddit every Friday they would post one of these kinds of challenges, like, hey, who can come up with the best query for it? So there are resources out there, and there's also, because there's so many, there's a leaderboard and there's rankings, and it's all free. Harris mentioned that they have guides, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, so
Need help
where does need help?
under,
Yeah, I clicked on the need help and it just goes to the Discord page for like the chat.
Just ask people there. The community is really good because, again, this is a nonprofit like run by threat intel and threat hunting people who just want to, who kind of have this philosophy that like understanding like EDR and query languages is a really good way to get your start in cyber. So we'll do two more and then we'll wrap it up there because I think most of you guys get the gist, and like we've been going pretty well with this. So we're looking for authentication attempts. Did we see how many authentication attempts did we see to the accounts of an employee with the first name Mary? So we get to name the variable here. Who wants to, what name do we want to give this variable? For those that didn't hear, Charles said Skibbity Toilet, and I'm going to date myself because I don't probably know how to spell Skibbity.
You got it right.
Did? Okay. That's embarrassing. Okay, so what are we looking for employee name here? Mary. And this has keyword works similar to the contains keyword we used previously, where it's a Boolean, a truth or false, whether the name does have the string Mary in it or not. We got a distinct username and authentication events where username is, and then we have to put the variable name in here. So what would that be, Charles? Skibbity Toilet. Thank you. This is like getting recording going on YouTube, and it's like I love that you put this here. So the authentication events are 70. Now, what I like to do when I'm especially like learning with this is you kind of just, it helps to see it as well. So like let's get rid of count so we can see what those authentication events are. And this is what I talked about with XDR, where it's no longer just endpoints we're looking at, but specifically the authentication tools. So I don't know what whether this is using Duo or Okta or what it may be, but we can look at this and we see for the username MA bar, successful login, failed login. And like a lot of times if you're doing this, you want to just kind of maybe play around with it and just be like, okay, well, I want to query by how many failed logins or maybe how many successful logins. The password hash and then a description. Now also, you're looking at this. This is a password hash. Like, yeah, I mean, if you can get into an organization's XDR as an attack or EDR as an attacker, it can be brutal. There's all the information you need there. You functionally have their entire network mapped out. Now that's not very common because usually it's not the EDR and XDR is not hosted on the network, but it has happened before. And again, like this is a password hash. You could try to crack it from there. So this was kind of just now keep in mind, like we've done 12 questions already. This specific one has a lot of questions. A lot. We're not going to get through them. What we're going to do is we're just going to try one more, because after this was kind of the KQL 101, so the introduction. We're just going to do one where it's we're going to create the query from scratch, and then we're going to move on. So we're the incident responder, right? We're being contracted to help out this company, and we have this. We're chatting out with Nene Leaks, which is a great name for an editorial director in the context of something being leaked. It's like if Harris Ransom got ransomed. So here's a conversation. It's hi Nene, I'm an incident responder who has been hired to help you investigate. Can you tell me what happened? Oh, I'm so happy you're here. We are also worried and confused, as you should be. We did not write that article. We are planning on releasing an article about the candidates, but the article I approved looked nothing like that one. We would never publish something so defamatory. I understand I'm here to help. Do you have any suggestions who I should talk to learn more about what happened? And she says, you might want to start with newspaper printer Clark Kent. I've seen that name before. He is the best person to review, he's the last person, to review articles before they go out to the publication. So what is the newspaper's printer's name? Superman? Wait, there's no way that's the answer. No, this is they're probably asking for, okay, never mind. I thought physical printer device. Okay, we're actually gonna do one more because that wasn't the real question. Next we talk with Clark Kent. He seems very distressed about the whole situation. He tells you he simply printed an article that was emailed to him. He always does that. He thinks the editorial intern was the one who sent the final draft of the article. What was the intern's name? Does anyone want to take a crack at this? Yeah. Well, what would the query be for that? Well, okay, think about what tables we have. What tables? So I'll do show tables again, right? Which of these tables would we want to look for the intern? Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, where role equals. I always forget if it's one or two equal signs. Intern.
I would do two just to make sure.
I've had trouble with this in the past because what's it called? I would use like all caps and or like all caps or from like SQL, but if you do all caps, it doesn't like it. Why is this breaking? Is there no maybe I kept it equal?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, we could also maybe do contains. Oh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Again, query language is super easy to get into, but there's a lot of like ways where you could show a lot of skill with that. Do we really we have a lot of journalism interns, but we're looking for an editorial intern, right?
Yeah.
So we could look through it that.
Ronnie McLovin.
Ronnie McLovin. I love that name. Here. Cool.
Why does your contains have a line under it?
I don't know.
Doesn't like it.
Yeah, I'm having like the same.
Oh,
Lines under distinct for some reason.
maybe there's just something that tells you like which is a better word to use. Like I think has functions in a similar way, but maybe I don't know what the difference would be. And then obviously we could go back to where we saw.
The same result. So.
Yeah. There might just be like nuances here and there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Like acceptable, but can be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I saw some messages in the chat. Let me get to them before I move on. And we have like a few more slides to go before we're done, just to like showcase a little bit more. Ronnie McLovin. They have It's a great name for an intern. I would hire Ronnie McLovin. So that's KQL, and it's like it feels easy, and it is to an extent, but there's a pretty high skill ceiling. So this, for example, is a query where you would look for S3 buckets with no such bucket policy, or no bucket policy, and that's really like if you're working in a threat hunting capacity and you want to have a proactive defense, you really want to kind of look for threats before they occur in your environment. And this can be especially the case if you're looking for recent events. So if a new vulnerability occurs or a specific threat actor that is targeting your sector your organization sector, you might want to look through your logs to see if something has already happened. Because the thing is, EDR, antivirus, SIEMs, these are all great solutions, but at the end of the day, the attacker's goal is always to bypass them, and they are successful at a surprising rate, even if they're not super sophisticated threat actors. So we need strong threat hunting practices to identify that ahead of time. This is just a community blog about how to use KQL for threat hunting and kind of how to weave that into a hunting hypothesis. Again, this is one of the things that I think makes cybersecurity so interesting is we have both a technical aspect where we have this query language we have to use, but we also have to think like an investigator. We have to use an investigative hypothesis, so on and so forth. We have to look at what kinds of TTPs and IOCs are out there. So this is an example. If these are potential IPs that could be used for exfiltration, we can set a query where, again, we create a variable, contains all these IPs, and this specific database has a device network events, which is pretty much similar to the outbound and inbound events, just kind of grouped together, and we're looking for where an IP is in this IP list. So that's why it's great for threat hunting. You can do the same thing with domains, and the skill ceiling gets even higher when you look at specific 0 days. So this one was posted. I'll link to. I'm not logged into LinkedIn, but if you the slides will be posted. There's this guy on LinkedIn. I forget his name. I think it's Steve Lim, not Lin, Lim. And he basically writes all these really cool KQL queries that if you work in a KQL capacity, you could just grab them and use these. And what this is for is it's for a Windows sysinternals 0 day. Now, you're looking at this after we did the simple KC7 ones, and you're like, what the hell does any of this mean? And I understand why. It's a lot more complex. It's nuanced. We're parsing stuff, and we're looking for a lot more specific process behaviors. But that's kind of what's so cool about it is because you can really there's a super high skill ceiling to it. And with something like KC7 Cyber, there are a lot of them. There's a leaderboard, and more stuff is being released. So it's a really cool skill to have. And a lot of times when you're interviewing for internships or roles in cybersecurity as a new grad, not a lot of people even know what EDR is, let alone can say hey, I played around with KQL, with KC7 a little bit. I investigated some threat hunts and some incident response using KQL. I feel like I could do the same with a different EDR, different query language, just because I have experience doing this on my side time. But yeah, with that, that's the workshop.